Okay, that's the first set of tests. Remember, we're on a 16-lane slot, bifurcated. We have 6 drives. Now the next set of tests, what we want to do is look at this in an 8-lane slot. So what we'll need to do is pull the card, put the connector on for an 8-lane slot so we can put it in there and then retest. And then that will help to establish if there's any difference in this format of 6 drives of an 8-lane slot versus a 16-lane slot running at PCI Express 3, no matter what the drives are. Because no matter what the drives are, the PLX chip, that's your governor that's controlling the speed. It's no longer the chipset on the motherboard. It's no longer the speed or the spec of the drives, that PLX chip. Okay, before we pull that and do that and run that test, let's take a look at the specs on the drive, the WD Black SN850, specifically that one drive, for the parameters we're looking at. Let's do that. Okay, over here on the bottom left, first of all, I want to show you what we're going to have on performance, whether it's a 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte, or even a 500 gig, is 7,000 megabytes. That's on the read. On the right, we get around, for the 1 terabyte, actually faster, 5300, which is what we're using, and on the 2 terabyte, 5100. Okay, over here on the right, this is page 3 of these specs, and I'll have a link to this in the description. The non-operating temperature is 85 degrees. Our operating temperature is 70 degrees, which is pretty good at 70 degrees. However, we've stayed below that. The goal was, my goal was to stay below 60, and I believe our temps bore that out. Let's take a look. The WD Black SN850 was 57 degrees. The Samsung 980 Pro was 45. The order of the drives, which is not necessarily the order of the test according to drive letter, but the way Hardware Info sees them as it enumerates. The first Sabrent Rocket 4 drive, of which there are 4. Drive letter H was 49 degrees, then we had 54 degrees, then 44 degrees, and then the last one, drive letter I, 48 degrees. The point of that, as I look at these numbers and these charts for what we've just done, is we've established the faster we go, the harder we go. Where PCI Express 3.0, no matter what the drives are, they can't go any faster than what they're capable of because of that PLX chip. So let's take a look at our heat chart right quick, and I'll explain some of that, because these numbers are going to be added to that chart. In fact, our chart, because of what we're doing, is now going to have to be 2 pages. Let's look at the chart. All right, chart on the left. We've now tested 14 heat sinks, and I'll go through the temperatures. On the right, we've now tested 3 quad cards, and those are 4 drive cards. And remember, we have just now tested a 6 drive card. So keep all that in mind, a lot of information. And the WD Black SN850, number 1, comes in at 92 degrees. Now that chart, even though there's 14 heat sinks, is 1 through 24, and the parameters changed as we went through the heat sinks. From number 1, looking at a heat sink for a dual M.2 NVMe adapter. Number 2, for a quad adapter that needed a heat sink that did not have one. And this was in the back of my mind. I didn't know these had heat sinks. We've used them. We've established a temperature, but based on speed, everything's safe, because my point, we're below 60 degrees, which is great because that's 10 degrees below 70. And as far as the temperatures, what happens on the motherboard, that's where the rest of this plays out, because, like I said, change one thing changes everything. We tested on the dual adapter for some of these temperatures, and we tested on the quad adapter where relevant, and we tested on the motherboard because that's where most people are going to use a heat sink. So as that plays out, again, to reiterate, number 1, the WD Black SN850 bare at 92 degrees, and that was on the Supermicro Dual M.2 NVMe adapter. Number 2, the second position on the TRX40 Designator motherboard, which would be in that position where the heatsink is at. With that stock heatsink, with that stock single thermal pad, that's where we got that temperature of 65 degrees. And then, of course, the others, as we have run through them, where it's relevant to designate a difference, where we've gone from active to passive, such as the NEO 10 and 11, or where we've gone from the dual adapter to the motherboard, which would be, again, in that second position, with a baseline of 65, and anything coming in better than that. So the best we've had was the Acidity 4-pipe, and then the JI aluminum fins cold iGlacier 8 on the motherboard at 48. We could not test number 22 on the dual M.2 NVMe adapter. It was just too big. But with the little bitty heat sinks that are on here, these are very similar in size to the micro connectors. Let's take a look at that again. And that micro connector came in at 70 degrees. Now, how would the micro connector compare to this? Because remember, everything on here on this chart is PCI Express 4.0 with the WD Black SN850, which is PCI Express 4.0 second generation a little over 7,000 megabytes on the read. And we are now running, because of the PLX chip, even though we're using those same drives that have established these temperatures, we are now running, because of the PLX chip, to reiterate, at about 3,500 megabytes. So heat's not an issue. The heat sinks they have on here are great. What I'm curious to see, what kind of performance will we have the same parameters in the 8-lane slot? So before we try RAID to do one test for speed, because we can't do heat, and I'm not sure how the sensors read for the software that we've installed, I'm going to do some more research on that. I'm being honest with you, because it's the first time I've ever seen this. I like to do this like you guys would see it, fresh out of the box, like a new user. Even though I've got experience with this, this is my first experience with that card. So, and for those that are going to comment about, yes, the lid is off, that's the way we test. Yes, if you add fans, it would change things. We talked about that in the beginning. If you put a couple of nice big fans on here, larger fans, move more air, make less noise. We're using stock. Everything on here is stock. And so far, so good. So for what it does, for what it gives you for capacity, remember, that's 6 drives on one 16-lane slot electrically. That's pretty cool. And then back over to the chart where we have the 3 quad adapters. Number 1, the ASUS Hyper M.2 16, and that's actually the PCI Express 4.0 version. We don't have the temps for the other 2 ASUS Hyper M.2 16 cards that were specifically version 1 and version 2 PCI Express 3, but numbers should bear out similar. Okay, that's the first one. The second was the Gigabyte Ars M.2 16 quad card, and then the ASRock. I was impressed with the ASRock. I really was. Even though that specs out at PCI Express 3, we used PCI Express 4.0 drives. We got the speed, and you can see what the heat is. And you can always go look at those videos for those particular quad adapters, and you can see the full results. What I'm trying to do is to keep this tight and give you just a synopsis. Okay, now next thing we need to do is we'll do a screen capture. We'll power down. I'm going to show you, we're going to change that interface on there. So we go from a 16-lane slot to an 8-lane slot. Cool, huh? Okay, Windows flag E, print screen, and we need to shut down. So we'll tap power. Once Windows powers down, we saw lights go out. Turn off power. Hold the power button. Drain power. Fantastic. Now we can pull power. We'll take the next step. Pull the card. Gingerly. Because we have 2 cables connected. A power cable and a data cable. If I think it's relevant, once I figure out what's going on, how to read that data off that data cable, I'll share it with you. But otherwise, if somebody else wants to explore that, be my guest. But anyway, everything's hooked up. Drivers installed, no BSODs, so I want to prove that with Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt's a finicky animal, as most of you well know. Okay, we've got the card out. We got to change that connector. So I need to release this, and we'll have a clean work surface. And we are going to need that connector in the box. To be able to swap this out is absolutely fascinating. But it was an extra part that I had to order. Let's take a look. So we're going to go from a 16-lane slot to an 8-lane slot. Nothing else we got to change. I'll keep that zoomed in as tight as I can, and I'm going to try to use their fancy pretty little screwdriver. And for those that want to try this, here's the SKU on the part. If that's 050 or 05D-OG by 8 adapter. I expect performance to be similar, but again, that's why we got this. That's why we're doing this, so we can test it. And to have a card that you can do this with is remarkable. Remember, the default is the by 16. The by 8 adapter was a special part we had to order. I spent a lot of time studying this, but it's been a long time since I first looked at it. So I've forgotten a lot of it. Okay, screws are off. That adapter should just pop loose. 3 screws. So I've got to work that loose to plug that in. Gotcha. So we'll use a flat blade. Okay, I'm getting the screwdriver, a flat blade screwdriver, up in between and pushing so I don't damage anything on the board or the circuits. And I'm pushing right at the screw holes to get that loose. That's the by 16. That's the by 8 that we're going to install. Let's see if I can zoom in on that a little bit. You can see where that goes on the card where I'm going to plug that in. And you can see where this other one was. So we're going to eliminate these pins right here. We're only going to be using these pins right here. To be able to do this is absolutely fascinating and fairly simple. To plug it in and secure it, just push the 2 down and I'm good to go. Now all I need to do is secure those 3 screws. Appear to be brass, not magnetic. 1 finger on the screw, Again, one finger on the screw. I'm just going to verify that connector is all the way down. I think it is. So much for that. Now we just need to get those screws set. Secure, secure, and secure. And you can see the print as I turn these over. I'll zoom back in. By 8 interface, by 16 interface. They both show the same SKU. Wow. 086-36, 086-36. But for the 8 part, for the by 8 adapter, the SKU is 050-09. That's what's important to know if you order it. So we're good. Fantastic. Now what we need to do is get this installed in the 8-lane slot. First thing I'm going to do is be sure and secure this edge connector. Okay. Looks kind of funny like that. In an 8-lane slot, we're going to retest. Now this is the test, and I think the location is going to be a lot more relevant to a lot more users that don't have a dedicated 16-lane slot. Because think about it, if you've got a dedicated resource like a 16-lane slot allocated and you bifurcate it, you got access to 4 drives, this makes no sense. However, if you're on a machine where you say you have 2 16-lane slots mechanically and you've got one 16-lane slot electrically, but then when you use both slots, because they're a shared resource, they both come 8 slots. Well, when you become an 8-lane slot, something like this makes a whole lot of sense. But it's PCI Express 3. So I'm eager to see what they're going to do with PCI Express 4. But if they wait long enough, they might as well wait for PCI Express 5. I'm just saying. Let's get this installed in an 8-lane slot that's dedicated. Wow. Crazy, right? And I need to restore our 2 cables. Data connectivity, even though we don't see it, and power, and make sure that's in that slot nice and tight all the way down front to back, and then secure the card to the I/O panel. On a side note, when you're building a machine, most of your PCI Express slots have a lock, and I'm pointing to it right here. I have removed the locks because we swap stuff in and out a lot. However, that lock is there, so when you put that card in, it locks that end in. In other words, if you put a card in and you remove the locks like me, if that card's kicked up a little bit, you'll get an error in the BIOS and the machine won't boot. So if you remove those locks that keep those cards held in, be sure you get those cards set in all the way so you don't have an error on the BIOS that keeps the machine from booting. Simple. Okay, cards in, secure. Cables are reattached. Plug in power. Turn it on. Beam me up, Scotty. Okay, we've energized the machine. We have power to the GPU. We can also see we have power on the card. I'll show you the lights in a minute. Our postcodes are showing, and our power on self-test speaker will make its announcement as soon as we have boot. And I don't need to go into the BIOS, so the first thing I may do is I may show you these lights right quick so you can see what I've been talking about. Fascinating sight. As we look at the I/O panel on the back, there's a red light that shows through from the I/O panel showing that there's activity, that there's power to the card. But anyway, nothing about drive activity, which I kind of thought we might see, which is what we get on the Supermicro Dual M.2 NVMe adapter. But I don't remember seeing anything about a definition on what those LEDs do. Ah, now I see one. Fascinating. I see a red LED, so this may be something to do with going 2 by 8. I saw 5 green LEDs and 1 red LED. Okay, the system is rebooting. It's reconfiguring according to the card. Let's see what's going on. Let's see if it's going to boot. So the card had to be reconfigured. 6 green LEDs, 6 amber LEDs. Okay, Windows is going to boot this time. So the card firmware, wow, had to reconfigure itself to recognize that it was using 8 lanes instead of 16 lanes. So one of those, to reiterate, one of those green LEDs turned to a red LED, and that red LED was over at the near one of the M.2 connectors. Oh, great. Microsoft is updating the computer. Their timing is what it is. Okay, 1 red LED, and I see 2 green LEDs. So we're rebooting again because of updates. I want to tell you what I see as I see it, in case I see something that looks anomalous. System's rebooting. I heard post, power on self-test. I'm old school. I like that PC speaker on the motherboard, I tell you. I don't mind reading codes, but I'd rather hear the post. 6 green LEDs, 6 amber LEDs. The amber LEDs never changed. The only thing that changes, to reiterate, are the green LEDs as we're going through post. Okay, Windows looks like it's coming back up, going through its updates. I don't remember doing that when we were on the 16-lane slot. That's why I'm pointing it out. That's why I'm telling you about it. I don't have a camera to put it because it's got to be at an angle to put it down in there like you need to see it. And I didn't know that I needed to be looking at that until now as I'm eyeballing it. Mono y mano. Okay, Windows is back up. Let's go see if we can do our next set of tests. First thing I'm going to do is Windows flag E just to double check drives. Everything should still be the same. And it is. WD Black SN850 is drive letter D. Samsung 980 Pro is drive letter J. And then the 4 Sabrent drives fill in the rest. Okay, we'll start with WD Black, then we'll do the Samsung, then we'll go down through the list. We have 6 drives to test, so hardware info. And again, we still have sensors, so we're going to look at smart telemetry for 6 drives. We'll be able to show 4 drives at a time. And remember, we have 6 drives on the card, 1 on the motherboard, being the Samsung FireCuda 520. So we're not watching that, we're not checking it, but I'm just making note of it. First drive we want to see is the WD Black SN850. And then we'll do the Samsung. Crystal disk mark. So we're going to go to drive D, 1 terabyte drive, 1 gigabyte test file, all. Looking at the minimum, maximum, average, and let's see what kind of temp we get this time. Now, if it matters, I don't know, but if it matters on a 16-lane slot, that drive came in at 57 degrees. Will we come in at 57 degrees again on an 8-lane slot? Don't know. Okay, first test complete. We topped out at 59 degrees, comparing that with the first test at 57 degrees. Now, we have to remember this is not a fully scientific test because this is not a cold boot. To have done a cold boot with this, we would have had to have gone 24 hours to let this thing cool off. Speeds look pretty good, on average, on par for what we expect for a PCI Express 3.0 PLX chip. Temperature, 59. I can live with that. Let's go to drive letter J. We'll double check. Windows flag E. This PC, Samsung 980 Pro, drive letter J. Just want to double check. I like to cover my assets. Samsung 980 Pro, 2 thermistors. We're looking at the first one. 1 terabyte, 1 gigabyte, all. Highlight. Watching the minimum, maximum, and the average. Now, even though the Samsung comes in slightly under the WD Black, because of the PLX chip, we should come in about the same, which is kind of fascinating when you think about it. But what's really incredible, and remember, I'm going to remind us, we're on an 8-lane slot with 6 drives. We have 6 M.2 NVMe drives on an 8-lane slot. This is the card that most people need, that most people probably never know existed, unless you just happen to see this video. So I think the title of this not only is going to be the Amfeltec Squid, but we're going to have to look at this and call this probably the Amfeltec Squid 6-drive M.2 NVMe adapter, so everybody can find it, because this is an anomaly. Kind of like the honey badger. I'll put a link up to it. I keep telling you about it to raise your curiosity, to pique your interest. Test complete. The Samsung 980 Pro came in at 46 degrees. Speed on the read and write, very respectable. And remember, we came in at 45 degrees on the by 16, and we're 46 on the by 8. Now let's get this in position. We'll test our other 4 drives, and we'll see where the temps go. So in order, we're going to go to drive F. So this is a 2 terabyte drive. We'll do a 2 gigabyte test file. All. We'll highlight and see which one of these rise first. And that'll be the one we're testing, which is that one. Sabrent Rocket drive letter F complete. That came in at 56 degrees compared to the 54 degrees previously. I'll take it. And of course the speeds looked respectable, still just a little bit under. And we don't know if the difference in the speed has something to do with the connector or the specification of the drive. That would require further testing, but there's only so much we're going to do. This just kind of give you an idea of how the card performs. There will be no shoulda, coulda, woulda with this. Drive letter G, 2 terabyte, 2 gigabyte, all. Highlight, and looks like we're affecting that drive. Drive letter G complete, which is actually drive number 5, and we came in at 44 degrees compared with 44 degrees. Perfect. So in the tree, we'll go to drive H, all. And drive H should be drive number 3, which would be at the top of the list, which should be that drive. And it is. Now that drive was 49 degrees. Let's see how close we come to that. And drive letter H is complete, and that finished out, which is the first in the tree, at 50 degrees. Previously, that was 49 degrees. So that's acceptable. Now one more drive, drive number 6, which will be drive letter I, 2 terabyte, 2 gigabyte, all. We'll highlight, and that should be that drive. Test and verify. And drive letter I is now complete, and drive letter I, which is drive number 6 in the list, came in at 50 degrees, and the previous test was at 48. Those are pretty consistent numbers. That's what I wanted to look at, because as we look at the heat and we look at the speed, Again, the PLX chip PCI Express 3. So far, I think what we know from what we've established, whatever drives you buy for something like this, I wouldn't necessarily buy according to the spec, which is the PLX PCI Express 3.0, but I would buy the drives which show you the best value for the money, because backwards compatible, you can always migrate those drives to another machine. You haven't done anything to hurt performance. You just got a governor on them that keeps them down. Now, we've also seen that because these drives are capable of more, because of the PLX chip, we're running them cooler. So the heating solution that's on here is efficient. Let's go back and look at the chart right quick. And of course, we will update this chart with another chart that reflects these new numbers that I've been sharing. For example, the WD Black SN850. We're at 57 and 59. And the Samsung 980 Pro came in at 45.46. And the Sabrent Rocket first one, which was drive letter H, which is actually the third drive, came in at 49 and 50. And then drive letter number 4, which is drive letter F, came in at 54 and 56. And then drive number 5, which was actually drive letter G, came in at 44 degrees centigrade and 44 degrees centigrade. That was the only one that was exactly apples and apples. And then the last, this drive number 6, the Squid, I guess you'd call it, which was drive letter I, came in at 48 degrees on the 16 lane and at 50 degrees on the 8. So I want to share those numbers for some reference. Okay, we've tested now both the 16 and the 8. The next thing we need to do while we're on the 8 is we need to power the machine down, pull the primary drive out. We need to go into the BIOS, set this up for a hybrid BIOS RAID, get Windows installed. I need to do all that and not show it, so that then we only go back to the test. And remember, we won't be able to show heat this time. We'll only be able to show speed. So we've established what we get on the drives. We know what we get when we go with 4 drives in RAID, the speed of 3. The question is, what do we get when we have 6 drives in RAID? Now, whether you use these drives individually as we have done, or whether you do what we're getting ready to do, that's an option. But I will test it first on the 8-lane slot, then I'll test it again on the 16-lane slot. So I'm going to cut at this point, and the next thing you're going to see is when we're doing the test, we're up on RAID. Stay tuned. All for you guys. And by the way, this is BuildOrBuy. My name's Gil Boyd. Welcome. I want to thank you for joining us. BIOS, boot. We see the WD Black. We see the Samsung. We see our 4 Rocket drives. Good. Okay. Fast boot is disabled. CSM must be disabled. And secure boot must also be disabled. Okay. Now we'll go to settings, I/O ports, SATA configuration, NVMe RAID, enable. Now we have to reboot for the next menu to come alive. F10 shows the modifications, and we reboot. Another setting becomes available. We'll go back into the BIOS. Reboot. Now another menu will pop up. We'll go under settings, I/O ports, and right there, RAID Expert. Now we can go in and configure the RAID. RAID Expert configuration utility. Now this is the fun part. Controller management, view controller, 1 controller, 6 disks, array count 6. I'll escape that. I'll go to array management. I have to delete an array before I can create it. So we will check all, enabled. Now we can delete the array. So those disks will no longer be individual disks. Confirm, enter, enabled, yes. No arrays in the system. Escape, create array menu now pops up. Select RAID level. We are going to do RAID 0, flying by the seat of our pants. Select the physical disks, media type both, which is interesting. We're going to check all, enable, apply changes, and we now have the array size 5997, 859. And we went ahead with the default cache tag size of 256K, which is the largest. Read cache, write cache, create the array. Manage array properties, and let's see associated disks. Array 1, RAID 0, 5.9 terabytes normal. Associated disks. 1, 2. 1 and 2 are 1 terabyte, and the other 4 are 2 terabyte. Escape, and we can escape that, and escape again. Escape. Now we'll go to boot from our device that we have assembled, which is a separate video. We're going to use this to install Windows. Makes it just a little bit quicker. So we'll get this plugged in. USB-C. Now under boot, we're going to have another parameter that will pop up once we get through this, but we've got to reboot and install Windows. So at this point, F10, Save and exit setup. OK. And once Windows reboots, BIOS. We'll click on boot. And there it is, Windows Boot Manager, AMD RAID. So all we have to do is a F10 save and exit. I've got some information I want to interject at this point before we go any further into RAID. And what we need to look at is the card itself with some details, because I have since found the PDF manual that they'd sent me quite some time ago, and I want to share with you because there's some details I've just discovered on this card. First of all, they've got 2 patents on this card. Now looking at the front of the card, up here at the top, Amfeltec has a patent on the logger that's built into this. The problem is the application. And the issue is there's not an application. It's something that someone's got to make. I'm going to share my thoughts, and I'm going to give you guys an email address that may be in the description to not only just get in touch with sales, but get in touch with support and say, hey, where's the application so we can log with this? Because according to what the documentation says, we should be able to see thermistors if we're able to log heat. But we need the application for which has not been developed, for which they need to do for the price of this card. So I'm going to include that information. The other patent they have, and this is understandable, is the connector. And once we go to the back side to look at the connector, there's some other details we need to go over before we get into RAID. Okay, that connector right now is the one that says by 16 interface. And the by 16 interface is where we're going to start. And this may have influence on the by 8 interface, which is removed right now. But they have a patent on that and how that works. And what's fascinating, there are some LEDs on this side that we need to look at. Since I now have the PDF manual, I have a better understanding of those LEDs. And there's also a couple of switches in here that I did not see because they're tiny. Let's take a look. So you'll notice the orientation, and I'm going to spin this because we're going to look at it 2 ways. This is that power connector on top of the card. And here's the I/O bracket right here. There are 2 LEDs here. One is active, that's red, shows activity. There's another set of LEDs right here, and I'm going to move this up, and I'll give you a definition of those since I have the manual. And the other set of LEDs, there's a row of LEDs here, there's 2 LEDs there, there's also a signal LED over here, and then we have these 2 switches that I just discovered. So I'm going to go through these because it's important to understand how this device communicates with the PCI Express bus manual. We also have a block diagram, which is really nice. So we can see the identification of the U5, U6, which are on opposite sides, then U7, and it shows those 3 grouped, and then it says U8, U9, and U10. Okay, I'm going to come back to this a little bit later and reference this because what I'm going to show you in a few minutes is how those 4 versus those 2 respond. But while we're here, you can take a look at, you can see status LEDs, that's what we're going to look at, a PCI Express switch, the downstream for the links, and 4 lanes for each drive, and then the upstream, they can be PCI Express by 8 and PCI Express or PCI Express by 16, for which they have a secondary patent. Okay, the status LEDs, performance temperature monitoring, cooling fan speed control, logging carrier board and M.2 module status, and transmit logging information via USB. And then, of course, the USB connection, for which they need to develop the application for that. It shouldn't be left up to, well, the circuits there. There's a driver you can install, and then there's a sample application. Sample application for this thing, like I said, where's the gold monkey? That needs to be developed. That needs to be made available as a download so we can use this. Because once we're in RAID, and another thing, the manual has no mention of RAID. So what I'm getting ready to share with you about RAID is something I have discovered, which I kind of find fascinating, which somebody else may want to go deeper into, but I'm going to show you with you what I've done and why I've done it, and then I'll tell you what I suggest, which is not necessarily what I've done. It'll make sense in a minute. I want to get into the definition of these LEDs and these switches right quick first. Back to the manual. On page 11, we have a checking status LED, D22 and D23. And changing the orientation of the card, here's the I/O bracket, for which you can see on the outside the red light we looked at, D22 and D23. Power on carrier board verification status. After power on, the operation status test result is shown on D22 red and D23 green. I have seen the red, but I have not noticed the green LED. And the next set of LEDs, we go through D14 through D21. D14 is always off, starting with D15. D15 through D21. And each one of those LEDs signifies the connection with less than 4 PCI Express lanes or connection speed is less than 8 gigabit. Now when those LEDs are off, that's normal operation and all lanes are connected. However, when they're on, the connection is less than 4 lanes. Okay, D15 through D21, that's one row of lights. Now as we go through the manual, the carrier board power off, backup status indication. The carrier board has an onboard batteryless data logger. Yeah, that's great. It'd be really nice if we had access to that. To enable status information output to onboard LEDs, push button S1 located on the bottom soldering side of the board. And I don't see a push button S1. The logger will indicate operation status after power is cut off and computer server chassis containing the carrier board is opened, can be opened. Status information is displayed with onboard LEDs. And then upon installation, the following status information is displayed on the status LEDs D14 through D21, which is actually D15 through D21, since D14 is not used. It says D14 is blinking. We can also take a look at the board layout. I would zoom in on that, but those are not real clear pictures. They're low resolution. It just shows the layout, how they are on both sides. But what I want to do is scroll on down to the LEDs. D1 red, Global PCI Express reset signal from motherboard. And what I gather from that, based on the connector, whichever one it sees, it says a reset to the motherboard. The motherboard, which is what we went through when we changed connectors, had to reboot itself, reboot the motherboard so it can reconfigure and reallocate resources, which is really, really nice. That's an amazing piece of technology. Back to the board. So the D1, and right over here, when I mentioned to you guys about another light lighting up, that's D1. When these lights changed, that activated D1. So here is our D2 and D3. And D2 says currently not used. D3 is the upstream PCI Express link status. So from D3 to D9, those are all supposed to be green. And then again, to reiterate, D15 through D21, that says D15 through D21 when they're yellow. Module connection issue, connection with less than 4 PCI Express lanes or connection speed is less than 8 gigabits per second. Well, that has me curious because I didn't know that. Now, what would cause that to be like that? It almost makes me wonder if that's the opposite, because I remember the red lights. I remember the yellow lights. I got to look at that again. And on the bracket, D22 and D23, D22 should be red, power status on. D23 should be green, power status on. So let's look at that, which would be back up at the top. D22 and D23. Okay, on the D22, I could see that one, and that was red. But I could not see the D23 green. Yeah, see, I see up there just that one red light right there. And I don't remember if this must have been with the by 8 connector. So we've got the by 16 connector on there now, and I'm curious to see what that's going to show. But I don't see the green light on there, I just see the red light. Now here's another description of the LEDs D3 through D9. And these are the D3 through D9. When those are solid on, PCI Express link up is 8 gigatransfers, which would be those lights right there. And there's a full description of all the connectors. The LEDs are the one that I'm trying to figure out mostly. Those amber are what they call the yellow LEDs. That's what we saw, and I believe that was with the by 8 connector. So I'm curious with the by 16 connector what we're going to see. Okay, that's one issue I've gone over. Oh, the switches. Let's go back to that. Well, I thought I saw something about the switch. I've looked in the document for SW3 and for switch, and I can't find anything that tells me what this is. But 1 and 2 is on, whatever that's for. So we're going to leave it on. One more click in the manual, then we're going to boot, see if we can watch the LEDs again. Let's see as we turn this on if we can get a better look at those LEDs coming on. Okay, we got our amber. I saw our 2. Then it goes to 1. I saw the green and the red on the I/O connector. I see 2 green. I see 1 red on the left, the amber. And let's see if those all stay green and those all stay amber or yellow. Thought they might change, but they didn't. I'm going to power the machine down and then see what those lights do. I know those LEDs are out of focus. I have the camera on autofocus. I'm going to turn it on one more time, and we'll watch those LEDs. I got to tell you, this is the fastest I've ever seen a computer boot with this card. If somebody's looking for a fast boot, this does it. 2 green, nothing across the, okay, solid green. Now let's see if those ambers come back. And run about 16 connector. I'm going to take the machine into the BIOS because that's the next place we're headed. But I want to see, it's interesting, those other lights didn't come on. This time I'm going to let the machine go ahead and finish booting, and I want to see what happens with those other LEDs. All I did was go into the BIOS and take a quick look, and I thought this was interesting enough to show you guys. So we see at the top right a red LED, and there should be a green LED. We're going through boot, heard the post, power on self-test. Let's see at what point we access those disks. Well, that's interesting. Those are off now. So I don't know what made the difference. Let's take a look at the manual again. If they're yellow, we're connecting with less than 8 gigabits per second. Connection with less than 4 lanes. Okay, so I've gone through quite a bit of an explanation. I want to show you those lights because right now, where we're at, how the drives are configured. Okay, the one on the motherboard's gone now. Everything now is on RAID. So I've taken the liberty of configuring the RAID in the BIOS, installing Windows on the RAID, and I'm ready to test. But before I test, so that it makes sense, I need to go back into the BIOS, show you how the RAID's configured, because remember, it's a difference in having 16 lane versus 8 lanes. And again, to reiterate, what I have done is not what I recommend, but I want to show you what I've done. We'll see how it affects it. But I'm absolutely fascinated with this card. It's just, it's not like anything we've ever looked at. And for those of you that are still with us, you guys are hardcore storage junkies. I appreciate it. Again, we're all about answering subscriber questions. BIOS. Just a quick reference, boot menu, and the Windows Boot Manager showing that we have RAID established. We're going to go to Settings. We're going to go to I/O ports. We're going to go down here to RAID Expert. We're going to look at Controller Management. And first of all, we have a controller, only one. We see 6 disks. Controller physical count 1. Total physical disk count 6. And notice that array count 2. I'll come back to that in just a moment. I'll escape that. Let's go to rescan. And as you can see, there's 6 disks, 6 physical disks. Now remember, I was very particular about trying to identify the connectors, who's on first. So the first 2 drives, which one is on each side, is a 1 terabyte drive. The WD Black SN850, the Samsung 980 Pro. The other 4 drives, 2 on each side, which are the Sabrent Rocket 4, and those are 2 terabyte drives. So 2 1 terabyte drives, and then 4 2 terabyte drives. And how this plays out on the RAID, let me take you a step further. Even though we can see all 6 drives, we cannot access all 6 drives at once. So if you'll notice, I have array 1, RAID 0, which is 5.9 terabytes. Then I have array 2, which is 4 terabytes. Oh, that was supposed to be a volume. that was supposed to be RAID 0. Let me go back and, okay. Array management, delete an array, and I'm going to delete that volume. 5.9 terabytes. Now I'm accessing all 6 drives, but I can only see the first 4 drives in the RAID. To get the other 2 drives, I had to set it up another array. So I'm going to delete it, and I'll recreate it. Confirm. Yes. There's nothing there right now, and I'm going to delete it. Enter. Okay. And I will confirm again. Deleting the array could take up to 15 seconds. Please wait for the operation to complete. Yes. Okay. Now we have one array, RAID 0, 5.9 terabytes. I'm going to escape this. I'm going to go create an array, and I'm going to change it to a RAID 0 and select the physical disks. Even if I select all 4 of these, which I'm going to do, I can only see 4 drives at a time. That's my point. And then the first one, the first set of drives I saw was 2 1 terabyte drives and 2 2 terabyte drives. In this second set, I see 4 2 terabyte drives. Now, I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do this to prove a point. Apply changes. And we're going to leave the cache tag size at the default of 256 kilobytes. Read cache policy and write cache policy. Read cache, write back cache. And those are both set. Now we're going to create the array. Now, it says we can create another one, but we cannot. And if you'll notice, it says select RAID level. That's set as a volume. It did not accept RAID 0. So let's escape that. Manage, select array. Array 1, RAID 0, 5.9 terabyte. And array 2, 4 terabyte. So right now in Array 1, RAID 0, 5.9 terabyte, 6 terabyte, let's view associated disks. And it shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, it says all 6 of them are there. Escape that. Let's go back to the top. Select Array. Array 2, that says RAID 0. Let's see if it took this time. Ah, it did. It was still reading the old BIOS settings. So Array 2, RAID 0, 4 terabyte. And the view associated disks. That says 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that sees 4 disks. Whereas on the first one, again, Array 1, we'll go to the bottom of the list, view, that says it sees all 6. The reason I think it's important to point this out, because you can only have access to 4 drives at a time, those first 4 should be the first 4 that are put in RAID. I have selected all 6 for right now because I wanted to see what would happen. Now, ultimately what could happen, I think what would happen is if we left it this way and filled the disk, which we won't, this would be kind of like the FAT32 issue, where if your partition is too big, when you get to the end of it, all that data that's filled then goes back and tries to write to the beginning, and then you corrupt the disk. That's what I think would happen if we left it this way. Now, I've set it up this way because I want to see what the test will be. Somebody smarter than me can tell me if that is true or not. That may not be, but that is my perception of this perspective. 6 drives, RAID 1, and 4 drives in RAID 2. Back. Now the documentation says nothing about RAID. So again, we're doing RAID 0, which is what I call RAID by the seat of our pants. I'm going to escape this. And to reiterate, we have Array 1, RAID 0, just under 6 terabytes. And we have Array 2, RAID 0, of 4 terabytes. Now that first one is set and ready to go. The second one, we're going to format once we get back into Windows so we can test them. I want to test them both, because I think it's going to be interesting on a 16-lane slot how these test out. So those amber lights had something to do with whether we're on a by 16 slot, which we are, they're off. If we're on a by 8 slot, they come on, that changes that. But we have the ability to go both ways, and I think most people will use this in an 8-lane slot. So let's go to the next step. Let's do our test. That's what everybody's been waiting for. But I find this absolutely fascinating. There's nothing else like this that I'm aware of. But I wasn't aware of this till someone said, "What do you think of it?" I said, "I don't know squat about it." I'm learning as you guys learn, and I had forgotten about the manual till I got to thinking, because I've got 8 hours recording on this, and I went through and did all this, and I said, wait a minute, something's not right, and that's what I'm showing you. So back we go. I hope my explanation helps. It's meant to for clarity and not to confuse. Okay, we're good to go. All we have to do, escape out of all those menus, and we're set for a boot. And theoretically, we could do another install of another operating system on that other RAID and have a dual boot. But as always, any dual boot should be completely separate disks. This is all the same bunch of disks on one card, so keep that in mind. So we're going to do our F10 save, shows what we've changed. Array 2 volume enabled, confirm, RAID level, Array 1, normal. Now Array 2 was changed to RAID 0 because it was originally set as volume, and I didn't catch that. But it's now set RAID 0. So we're going to say OK and reboot. But I think you guys needed to see this at this point. So we, as always, we run our power on self-test. So we've got power to the GPU. We've also got power to this card. You can see a little green light there at the top. We've also got our postcodes we're seeing. Power on self-test right up there. And back into Windows to do our tests. I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. Now, since we don't have the ability, I'm going to work on it to figure out how we can see that card through that USB connection, because we're supposed to be able to see, which means there's thermistors there to log that information. When I figure that out, we'll get another video out about that. So I've got the question into Amfeltec. We'll see what they say. But if they've got to develop the application, well, what's up with that? Keep it simple, make it work. Windows. So there's no point in bringing up hardware info. We're going to go straight to Crystal Disk Mark, and we're going to benchmark this. Now this is Crystal Disk Mark version 7 because we want to keep it apples and apples with the other stuff we've been testing. And our C drive, so we're going to do our test. Since we can only go 2, 4, or 8, we'll use an 8 gigabyte test. First test complete. Okay, to reiterate, this is RAID 0 on a by 16 slot, and I find that absolutely fascinating. Now let's keep in mind we're on PCI Express 3.0. We have a PLX chip that is our governor. However, we have 6 drives in RAID that really should be 4. And then we have a second RAID we're still going to look at here in just a minute, but this is RAID number 1. And PCI Express 3.0 should be about 3,500 megabytes. And we've established 8,989. That's almost 9,000 megabytes. On PCI Express 4.0, first generation, 4 of those drives, which are the Sabrent Rocket 4, those are capable of 5,000 megabytes per drive. And PCI Express 4.0 second generation, those 2 drives, which are the WD Black SN850 and the Samsung 980 Pro, are capable of just right at 7,000 megabytes. The WD Black is just a hair faster. But look at those writes, 13,145 megabytes. Now, what we need to do, we'll do a screen capture, Windows flag print screen, save that, and hold that thought. That's test number 1. Now what we're going to do is go into disk management in Windows so we can format that other RAID. We'll test it too while we're here. Back. So we'll zoom out. Let's go to Control Panel, Administrative Tools. We're headed for Disk Management. So we'll go to Computer Management, and a dialog box will pop up when we click on Disk Management, and it will want to take on that disk, and it says 1 disk, GPT, which is what we want. And it's going to initialize it. We're going to say OK. And we now have that other 4 terabytes. So we're going to allocate it with a simple volume. Next, full capacity. Next, with a drive letter. Next, NTFS. And we'll call that second RAID 0. Next, finish. Dialog box pops up. And we have another drive letter. So we'll click on this PC. And we now have the first volume and the second volume that we've just created. So let's go test the second volume. Close all that down. So now we will select, we're going to have to close it before it'll recognize it. Call it up again, crystal disk mark, and now we see our drive D, which is 4, just under 4. So we'll go from an 8 gigabyte test file to a 4 gigabyte test file. And let's test and see what we get. Second test is complete, and that is the second RAID array. Look at those numbers. Don't need to repeat anything, just look at that, and I'll say 11,623 megabytes on the read, and wow. 12,841 megabytes on the write. That is wicked. I think this is probably going to have more questions than answers, but hopefully provide enough information for those that are curious how all this plays out. So again, we'll do another print screen so we can save that image. Now what we need to do is power down and change our test, because the next test we need to do are those same 2 tests, but on a by 8 slot. And I would imagine on the by 8 slot, that's when we get the amber lights. And I saw the red light and 1 green light blinking, showing that we still have power. Shut down, turn it off, drain it. Yep, everything's drained. Now we can pull the card and move that over. Okay, I'm going to pull that camera out of the way for now, because I want to be able to put it back on here when we're looking how this is going to work. So we got to pull power, make sure we're drained, pull the card. 2 cables to be removed and make it a little easier work. I know there's going to be some more questions that will arise from this. We will try to address as best we can. As many answers as we've come up with, there may be more questions than answers, but we'll do our best. This is something that I thought would be another one of those esoteric things, but apparently not. What an amazing piece of technology we get a chance to look at. And we're going to swap out that connector right there on the bottom using their fancy little screwdriver. And using a flat blade micro screwdriver, I'm going to need to reach up under there and pry that connector off again, gingerly. And that is a tight fit. Okay, we're going from 16 lane now to 8 lane. Fascinating. Part, swap out. Take a look at that again. From this part, which was by 16, to this part, which is by 8. And we'll see. I think this is important to do because really I think most people will be using the by 8 more than will be using the by 16. Because if you got a motherboard, again to reiterate, with dedicated resources, just get a regular card. Now, one of you has already told me that he checked with Amfeltec and the price has gone up. It was a substantial product to purchase to start with. It's even more substantial now with the increase in price. Okay, overhead. So we have that back down with the new one by 8. And make sure those connectors are in tight. And then reinstall our 3 screws. 1, 2, 3. And assembly set. And we're ready to go back in the box. And this time in an 8-lane slot. And the system we're working with is the Gigabyte TRX40 Designaire, where we have 2 16-lane slots and 2 8-lane slots. And we're getting ready to go in that first 8-lane slot with this card. And the other 8-lane slot has the Gigabyte Titan Ridge Thunderbolt 3 card that uses 4 lanes. The other 4 lanes we lose, that's an 8-lane slot. But these are all dedicated resources. We also have 4 M.2 NVMe drives, 2 on the motherboard, which we're not using either one right now, to the CPU, and the other 2 through another heatsink through the chipset, but they're all PCI Express 4. And the drives on here are 2 different versions, 2 different generations of PCI Express 4. 1 on each side, second generation, and 2 on each side, first generation. Wicked. We'll secure the card in the slot, and even though we're not using the data logging, I'm still going to plug in the cable for it. apples and apples. And if we get that where we can use it, we'll tell you about it. Everything's set. Plug in power. Turn it on. Energize. Let's see if we can watch our LEDs this time. We should see a row of amber, which shows that we're not at full speed. 2 green lights, the 1 red light on top. I didn't get the camera flipped over back quick enough so you could see the green light on top with the red light. Yep, there's the amber, there's the green. We had post, power on self-test. So this time, straight to Windows. Don't need to go to the BIOS because we've already laid that out. Spent a lot of time on that, which is kind of wild. And I'll reiterate that. Even though I have all 6 drives in the first RAID, I would only put 4 drives, my suggestion. And then I'd take the other 2 drives, put them in a separate RAID. But again, we're writing to 6 drives. You see the numbers we get. I could do it, what I've just said, but to do so, that's about a 45-minute to 1 hour deal because I have to destroy the RAID, rebuild it, put Windows back on it. So I'm right now at about 10 hours. So we're gonna do this and wrap it up. Windows. But I appreciate you guys staying with it and watching this. Okay, can't do anything with hardware info, so we're gonna go to Crystal Disk Mark. Okay, we're on C drive. We got a 6 terabyte drive, or just under. So since we don't have a 6 gigabyte file option, we'll do 8 gigabytes all. Okay, this test is complete, and we are now remembering to reiterate in an 8-lane slot. PCI Express 3.0 PLX chip. The read, just under 6,500 megabytes. And on the right, almost 7,000 megabytes. 6 drives. And this first test, 6 drives in an 8-lane slot, which should be only 4 drives. But I want to do this to see what kind of numbers we'd get. And no, I'm not going to do the other, because at some point, you got to cut it off. One more test, the other RAID array. So we'll do a screen capture of this, and I'll put the numbers up side by side. This time, D drive just under 4 terabytes. So we'll change that to a 4 gigabyte test file, all. And that test is complete. So to reiterate, we're on an 8-lane slot. We have 6 drives. This is the second RAID array, and we've established 7,100 megabytes, 7,100 megabytes on the read, and just under 7,000 megabytes on the write. That's pretty wicked performance considering we're PCI Express 3 with a PLX chip, and we're in a computer that is PCI Express 4.0, the Gigabyte TRX40 Designaire. Blows my mind. And we did our testing in a 16-lane slot and an 8-lane slot. We looked at heat and speed on both those. Individual drives, now in RAID. Let's compare all 4 of those if we can. Right quick, I'm going to take you over to the chart. I don't know how relevant it's going to be because this is strictly about heat as we've tested the drives. On the left side, number 1 through 24, starting at the top with the WD Black SN850. We've actually tested 14 heat sinks, but because of how the test evolved, I'm going to leave this up so you can look at it and kind of study it where the temperatures are at. Then we've done temperatures on 3 different quad cards, and you can see how those set. And now we've done this work with the Squid card, 6 drives. Wow. I think the thing I want to, my takeaway on this, I'll share with you in a minute. Let's go back to the chart for these 4. Of 11,623 megabytes on the read and 12,841 megabytes on the write. And our lowest number was 6,500 megabytes on the read and almost 7,000 megabytes on the write. So something to look at, something to consider, something to think about. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I want to thank you for watching. My takeaway on this is if you need to put 6 drives in a machine, and if you've got a motherboard that's got shared resources, this is the way to do it. The other option is get a motherboard with dedicated resources. And if you're going to get a motherboard with dedicated resources, go to a workstation. But for the technology and what this can achieve, this is phenomenal. Now, for Amfeltec, you guys have 2 patents. One for the connector, which is phenomenal. So you can go from a by 16 to by 8. I love it. However, this data logging thing, for which you have a patent for, develop the application. I've read the documentation about how that's supposed to work. Open up the COM port, clearing the data path so that it's ready to receive and send, and closing it. No. Develop the application, include it for free with this thing. If you're going to make that capability available and you got a patent for it, finish it. Otherwise, I'll just say that's not a good idea. But it is a good idea to be able to provide logging on that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I want to thank you for watching. My name's Gil Boyd. This is BuildOrBuy. We're on to the next video. We're out.